Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the City of Miami Beach City Commission Chambers. This is the Resiliency Code workshop. We're here to discuss the Resiliency Code that is being drafted. This is a major update to the city's land development regulations. The update is intended to clean up the existing code, incorporate resiliency throughout the code, and improve the transparency for the members of the public while still maintaining quality of life. We're going to have a presentation by our consulting team, led by Perkins & Will and Jose Helabert as the project manager, his colleagues at Plus Serbia, and they'll introduce themselves as we proceed. We're here with members of the planning board in person. We have Nick Chelpy, Kareem Brantley, and Gail Durham, and online we have member Tanya Bat. And so welcome everybody. We will have a presentation from our consulting team, then we will open it up to the public. And then we'll have some discussion on the proposals. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jose Helabert.
Good morning. Very, very glad to be here. I feel a little bit like when I saw once Richard Harris saying that when he started his acting career, he came on stage, he was doing Hamlet, and there was only one person in the audience who was his mother sitting in the front row. And he said, well, even if it's only for one person, we will do the whole play. So Dennis, thank you for coming. And thank you, Nick and Gail, for being here. We want to, like Rogelio said, we want to give you presentation of what we have been doing. We're actually very excited. It's almost like social work in the sense that we are really trying to make the code really more user-friendly for the public and also for the staff to also be able to use it better. The code right now, I don't know, Rogelio, maybe 20 years or 40 years that the code, 40? 30 years that the code basically, whenever there is an issue that comes, there's an amendment or there's a new section added. And one of the things that we found out, and obviously Rogelio and Alejandro know, that contradictions exist in the code. Frankly, even for members of the public, I'm doing a house here now in Miami Beach, and the owner had to get the help of a zoning attorney to help them get through it. So we believe that the things that we are doing for the city right now, when the new code comes into effect, will again make it easier, not for the zoning attorneys. They'll probably dislike the fact that now it's going to be simpler and you might not need a zoning attorney for everything. But for the public and the majority of the public, and it was very interesting to hear from Rogelio that the majority of the applications that come to the city are actually for single-family residential. It's not for high-rises or so. For those people that we want to do something that they can check the code, they know what they are getting into, they can understand it, they can traverse it, and frankly, for the city, so as they review the applications and they implement the code, it also makes it easier for them to go through it. And at the end of the day, what I think that will yield is the applications will flow faster. So the complaints that I'm sure you're all getting of how long has my application been in the city, why I'm not getting a response, why is this so difficult, I think a lot of those things will really be eased. So as Rogelio said, we put together, I think, a great team in order to do this. Perkins and Will is an international firm, second largest in the country right now. I started the Miami office 25 years ago, and I've been in Miami and working in Miami Beach for 40 years now, so I know the code pretty well. But for this, there's two Perkins and Will offices working on it. You will hear from my colleagues in Toronto, who have done some tremendous plans, and we brought them in, even though the weather in Toronto is slightly different than Miami. Some of the issues that they're dealing with in Toronto are similar. They don't have an issue of seawater rise, but frankly, they have an issue, believe it or not, of sunlight. And they also have an issue of how do you change the code when there is all this tremendous amount of development happening. It's not a sleepy little town that wants to change the code. It's something that has to be ongoing. So you will hear from them as well. You will hear from Paul Kulig and Anna Iannucci. And as Rogelio mentioned, we have also wonderful Florida-based planning firm that is working with us, Plus Urbia, and where we have the head of the firm here, Juan Mullerat, and Maria Benfeld, the principal planner who's been working with us throughout, and you'll be hearing more from them in the presentation. We also have here with me Anna Helibert Sanchez, and if there's a similarity in last name, it's because she's my sister. But she's not here because she's my sister. She's here because she's the former planning director of the city of Miami, where they went through also a code update a number of years ago. So she's been, advising us not only in the code, but also in what it takes to actually go through the state of Florida and actually make it the law of the land, so to speak. And speaking of law of the land, we have with us one of the finest zoning attorneys, Nancy Stroud, who basically that is her specialty, working in codes. Nancy has been reviewing everything that we've been doing so that we can make sure that the code not only meets the city of Miami Beach's expectations, but also that there is not a legal challenge to it afterwards that might keep it from being implemented. When she did a similar thing for the city of Miami code, there were no challenges to it. So we feel, very confident with Nancy working. And finally, you're also going to be hearing from probably one of the most exciting elements of our program, which is a gentleman by the name of Max Zavala. Max and his firm, Gridix, are already working for the city of Miami Beach. And you will see Max has developed a number of programs that also make it very, very user-friendly. So anyone can just get online, review the property, review what is allowed, everything. So again, all these things are in the interest of making the process, as Rogelio said, much more transparent. If we could have the first slide, please. Okay, and again, these are the what we're going to take you through today. What is the code? What are the changes that are going to be made? Towards the end of the presentation, we will discuss a series of opportunities that are available, that we can even make this code better. We are not doing those things right now. Some of them, involve a longer process. Some of them even might involve going to a citywide referendum. So we have push that for the future. But we will tell you what we are thinking right now. We're very excited to get feedback from you of where we're at, and hopefully other members of the community. And then we'll take you through the schedule of what are the next steps as hopefully we move towards approval. Next. Next. So again, we've covered some of these aspects. Again, originally, when we responded to the RFP, there were two primary goals. One, and especially on days like today, as we speak, probably West Avenue is already getting flooded. Today, days like this, you don't have to remind folks in Miami Beach that this is ground zero of seawater rise. So the city wanted us to see how we could implement some strategies. We can't solve seawater rise, at least we can't. But can we take some steps to actually prepare present and future construction to deal with it? Again, I don't have to tell you that these things really affect the economy. One of the things that we analyzed when we began the process, we took the whole city of Miami Beach. I'm sure you've seen these diagrams many times of what Miami Beach is going to look like in 50 years and 75 years, and a good part of the city could be underwater. So right now, it's the highest priced real estate in the state, but if this thing is not dealt with, it could rapidly go the other way. We will also talk about the fact that even though we don't expect this to happen again 30 years from now, we hope that this is a more flexible code so that things can be done and adjusted in real time. Again, one of the things we have to review is indeed what is the seawater rise. The city asked us to actually analyze all the way up into 100 years from now. Not that the code is written for 100 years from now, but what would happen 50, what would happen 75, what would happen 100 years from now. And finally, it's been said several times, we want to make this a transparent, easy to navigate code. As you will see, we are not here today to propose zoning changes. The zoning is remaining the way it is. We're not here to propose additional FAR in any part of Miami Beach. As you know, FAR has to go for a citywide referendum, and we are not here to propose, additional density. All of these things, as you will see, are not part of it. What we really are delving into is really make the document that you have basically bringing it into the 21st century. And one of the things I hope you will agree is that the final product is an easier document to navigate and not the other way around. So I'd like to bring in, hopefully, connecting Paul Kulig, my partner in our Toronto office. I'm not going far.
Can we add Paul Kulig to be able to speak?
Paul, if you can, please unmute yourself. Paul, if you're on, please unmute yourself.
Anna, can you hear? Anna, can you hear us?
I see them on the screen, but I cannot hear them.
Anna and Paul, we can see you, but we can't hear you.
Anna, are you there? Can you talk to me for a second? Let me see what we have going on here. I can hear you, but your levels are not coming in here. So just give me 1 second and see exactly what's causing this issue. Can you talk to me right now? Try this again. Anna, are you there?
Yep, I'm here. Are you able to hear me now? Or Paul,
Loud and
perhaps
clear.
you could
Thank
try
you
as
so much
well?
for your patience.
I can hear you,
troubleshoot that.
Anna, and then
So we're back
testing
on it.
1, 2, 3.
And,
Testing
thank you
1,
so much
2,
for your
3.
patience.
All right, coming through loud and clear.
Well, that's good to hear. Are we all settled in? Are we good to start?
PJ, is everything okay? All right, you are. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. I'll get started then, Rogelio. Is that good?
That's good.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, and apologies for that small delay. As Jose mentioned, I'm Paul Cooling, and I lead the urban design practice globally for Perkins & Will, but I also happen to be located in Toronto. The work that we do broadly includes a large number of resilience plans, and we've completed those for the cities of Minneapolis, Toronto, Louisville, as well as the entire island of Puerto Rico as examples. Our work was informed by some of the research through our resilience lead, Doug Pierce, who's helped us map but also interpret a lot of the various projections and make sure that it's grounded not only in science but sort of well-founded urban design principles. Our local work or our personal work as well is really founded around the connection of livability and quality of life. And so how do we bring development together with quality of life, the public realm, the various spaces that make cities vibrant like Miami Beach and the street life and the beach and the parks in a way that allows for people to enjoy continued growth of the city. And we're doing that in a way that hopefully is adaptable to the process of climate change. And so that work was, or that experience was then informed by further research. So we've looked at work in other cities through South Florida, across the state, but as well as up and down the coast. So we looked very significantly at some of the work in New York City, for example, where they updated their code over 5 years ago and have since actually revisited and updated it based on some of the development activity. So really the idea here is to learn from other people's mistakes, bring it to Miami Beach, adapt it to the local knowledge that Jose, Juan, Anna, and others bring to this assignment, and develop something that's really made for Miami Beach. So at a high level, goals for the code, as Jose already mentioned, really to look at the climate change adaptation and resilience and adapt the code to suit that. We're also looking to modernize and simplify the code while protecting quality of life. We know the very important role that the public realm, the streets, the beach play in the quality of life. Is why people are here, and it's what we need to protect as we adapt as well. Part of that, an integral part of that, is safeguarding historic preservation. So we've looked very closely at historic districts. We've looked at some of the past studies that have proposed modes of adaptation and are attempting to integrate that into this code as well. And then, as Jose mentioned, we're looking to ensure the clarity and transparency. And so Max will be identifying some of the tools that will make some of this much more accessible to various stakeholders like the Land Use Board, as well as the public and people involved in the permitting process and the development activity. And then lastly, introducing or integrating an element of flexibility in the code so that we can adapt and slowly incrementally adjust to whether it's sea level rise or other changes as we complete various aspects of the code. And I'll spend a little bit more time on that later. So broadly, we're going to pass things over to Anna to get us started into the structure of the code. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Good morning, everyone. My name is Anna Yanucci. I'm a senior associate and urban planner in the Toronto studio of Perkins & Will. And I have previously done coastal resilience work in Barbados, doing a new physical development plan for the island of Barbados, and zoning codes in northern Alberta. So I'm looking forward to bringing together those two aspects of my experience here and to collaborating with and learning from your local team in Miami Beach. So now what we're going to do is take you on a walkthrough of our proposals for the new code, starting with the overall structure of the code, and then walking through the major proposals for each chapter one by one. On this slide, you can see the structure of the current code, the 8 chapters of the land development regulations on the left, and the proposed structure of the new code on the right. And as you can see, there's a very direct correlation between the old chapters and the proposed new chapters. One exception to that is the sustainability and resiliency chapter, which has been incorporated into the very beginning of the general to all section at the beginning of the zoning districts and regulations. And this is to ensure that it isn't siloed off to itself somewhere where it could be missed, but it's up front and center in the regulations for the districts and is a prime consideration. Most chapters, we're only proposing to make minor updates for clarity and consistency and transparency, as Paul and Jose have been saying. So those are identified on here in the pale yellow color. There are a few chapters where we're proposing more significant changes, and those are identified in green. So the off-street parking chapter, we're looking to tie the parking districts where reduced requirements apply a bit more directly to the comprehensive plan and the transportation master plan. And the areas that they identify as transit hubs and corridors. The sustainability and resiliency regulations have been enhanced, and the zoning districts and regulations have been significantly updated, both to enhance resiliency and to update and clarify and improve usability. And Maria will be taking us through those in more detail later on. So now to go through each of the chapters one by one, starting with chapter 1, I'll just draw your attention to the top right side of the slide here. On each of these slides, you'll see a word or several words in that corner, and those go back to our goals for the update to the code and describe the major reasons behind the code changes that we're proposing in each chapter. So for chapter 1, general provisions, the only significant change proposed here is that all the definitions throughout the code have been consolidated in chapter 1. So this will greatly simplify the navigability of the code for users, as currently the definitions are distributed throughout. And to further simplify navigability, the definitions will be organized by type. We're also doing a cleanup of these definitions, just adding in those that are missing, clarifying those that are unclear, and removing those that no longer appear in the code. So one of the categories of definitions will be uses, and the use definitions will have the same organizational structure as some new use tables that will be created for each district and which Maria will be speaking about. So this will further improve the usability of the code because there will be this standardized organizational structure between the definitions for the uses and the permitted uses within the districts. So now I'd like to pass over to Nancy Stroud, our land use attorney on the team, to describe the changes she's proposing for Chapter 2, Administration and Review Procedures.
Thank you, Anna, and good morning, everyone. I'm Nancy Stroud, and as Jose had mentioned, I've done a lot of work in my law career for local governments in reorganizing and rewriting, updating their codes, including the Miami 21 code. And so approaching Chapter 2, we've gone forward as with the rest of the code in trying to update, clarify, make more transparent the procedural requirements of the code. And that includes reorganizing some of the code for readability. Some of this chapter will look similar, but I think it will be a lot tighter reorganization. And standardizing and consolidating provisions for the appointment and conduct of the land use boards. Standardizing also general application procedures for all land use applications, including new pre-application requirements that should help applicants and the city in review and processing land use applications. We're also updating the timeframes for decision making as required now by Florida statutes. At the same time, we're not changing any decision-making authority of the boards. We're not reducing authority and we're not increasing authority. But we think we're making it much clearer what that authority is and how it is actually exercised. Two new things that include establishing a zoning amendment cycle. And the proposal will be to only allow amendments to the land development regulations 4 times a year. So you can consolidate a number of applications in one of the 4 cycles, but this should help reduce the load and the lack of transparency with the continual constant changing of the land development code. Much like the statutes used to require a cycle for amendment of comprehensive plan amendments. And then one thing we're also working on is an additional commission process that would allow the commission to waive certain land development requirements related to design, not to density or FAR, but design for particular projects. And that would include a process that would involve the planning board, would involve 2 hearings before the commission, and would require design review board approval before this waiver could take place. And the waiver would be limited to a certain percentage of the regulatory requirements. And that's basically the summary for this chapter.
Thank you, Nancy. There we go, next chapter. The proposed changes in Chapter 3 is really no substantial changes are proposed. We're just doing a minor cleanup to this chapter to make sure that the organizational structure matches the rest of the new proposed code. And we understand that the Parks Department is updating concurrency management and that this will be inserted when complete. Chapter 4 landscape requirements has been updated fairly recently. So we aren't proposing significant changes here, but we do see some opportunities for enhanced resiliency, particularly related to promoting shade trees and drought and salt tolerant species that are suitable for local conditions. So our proposals here are to add minimum soil volumes, expand requirements for drought and salt tolerant species, and to increase stormwater permeability in parking lots. Unlike the landscape chapter, much of the parking chapter is quite old, so there are more significant updates proposed here. And what we're really trying to do is just modernize and simplify parking requirements and align the areas where reduced parking requirements apply, which is your current parking districts 2 to 9, with the transit hubs and corridors that are proposed by the comprehensive plan. So this is an opportunity for different departments within Miami Beach to work together, with the code used as an implementation tool to support the transportation department's goals around multimodal transportation and establishing areas where use of transit is more common. So the primary chapter changes to this chapter will be to consolidate similar parking use categories, because right now there are a lot, so that can be greatly simplified. To consolidate the parking districts into just a few tiers of parking requirements without actually changing those parking requirements, just have a simplified consolidated structure. To expand applicability of bike parking requirements. And then in this chapter, there are also some processes for staff. And then in chapter 6, signs, the changes proposed to this chapter are really about simplifying and clarifying requirements and review responsibilities among staff. So as part of the clarification, we'll be adding some sign definitions and some graphic exhibits to support them. And we'll be standardizing requirements and reorganizing the chapter for readability. And now I'd like to pass over to Maria to speak about the changes proposed for chapter 7.
Good morning. My name is Maria Benfeld, and I'm an urban designer and planner at Pluserbia. So in chapter 7, zoning districts and regulations, we relocated and enhanced the sustainability and resiliency chapter to general to all zoning districts. So resilience-related regulations and ordinances permeate the district regulations. Resilience, adaptation, and mitigation standards are the most prominent in this section, but are also accompanied by other regulations that affect the quality of the public realm. We also incorporated regulations that are common to all districts, or which apply to certain building types or uses that are repeated across multiple zoning districts. An example of this is the frontages and the minimum unit sizes, where we make reference to this section in each one of the zoning districts. And if there are any exceptions or differences from what says in the general to all, we list them in each specific zoning district. Next slide, please. We also enhanced this chapter with graphic exhibits that clearly show the different vertical measurements of the code. We clarified and streamlined the vertical measurements. Wherever possible, we tied vertical measurements to base flood elevation. This allows, because BFE is in flux and allows the code to remain, and this allows the code to remain up to date as it migrates upwards over time. So what you see on the slide are the long and short frontage standards that are now supported by exhibits that graphically and clearly show the location of the standards on in the text. Next slide. So in the resilience and adaptation standards, we show the stratification of the different parts of the buildings or the layers. From bottom to top, this includes subterranean, understory, residential first habitable level, non-residential first habitable level, and the upper floors, which are dealt in each one of the zoning districts. All graphics show BFE, DFE, grade, and future crown of the road as reference. So this is an example of how we are graphically showing what the subterranean level is and where it starts, where it's like anything below grade. So the next slide shows understory, and then the next slide, sorry. Yes, thank you. So the understory is the layer under the habitable portion of the building. Parking is often located here. And this graphic shows that its lowest point is the future crown of the road. And it has a minimum internal ceiling height of 10 feet. And over time, understories may be partially or wholly submerged by road and yard raising. Next slide, please. So the next slide shows graphic representation of the residential first habitable level that is located no lower than DFE. This example is showing BFE plus 5-foot freeboard in order to protect life and property from the short-term effects of storm surge and fair weather flooding, as well as long-term threat of sea level rise due to climate change. Next slide. And this is a graphic representation of the non-residential first habitable level, and it clearly shows that the level cannot be lower than the future current of the road in the case of short frontage standards, and future current of the road for plus 14 inches in the case for long frontage standards. Next slide. We also increased the minimum non-residential ground floor ceiling from 12 feet to 14 feet above DFE to allow for a few more decades of retrofit and adaptability to street raising projects. This will simplify the process, and the 5 extra feet that are currently can be obtained through DRB will be allowed when 14 feet are provided. So the next slide. This shows, we introduced a section with frontage standards. This provides guidance on how to shape the public realm. They are calibrated to the city of Miami Beach and address complexity of future grade changes and design flood elevation. We also included frontage types that acknowledge peculiarities of Miami Beach architecture heritage, such as the eyebrow, marquee, dingbat, terrace, and forecourt. These tables also provide hints on so that the user knows in which zoning districts a particular frontage type is likely to be used. So for example, the examples there you see the front yard with stoop or porch. It clearly states that they can be applied in the RS districts, in the RMs, and maybe the townhome districts. Next slide. In terms of minimum unit sizes, we relocated them, we converted them into tables, these standards, and we moved them to the general to all districts. And this makes the code leaner and less burdensome for an applicant or a reviewer. And we also removed the average unit sizes from the code. This also allows us to not have to repeat, the minimum unit sizes that keep on showing up over and over in the existing code. So we have them on a table at the beginning of Chapter 7. So in Section 2 of Chapter 7, we cleaned up and created a consistent chapter structure for all districts. This is building from the existing code organization, and we worked on a consistent and clear structure. The numbering throughout the code was made consistent and simplified so that the code can be amended and expanded without having those reserved sections all the time. All zoning districts remained except for a few that we removed because had not been deployed in the zoning map, and these were RO2 and RO3. We also recognized the districts as a gradient from, we reorganized them as a gradient from less intense and dense to more intense and dense. So the less intense is an example is the single family residential and townhome districts, and the more intense districts were the mixed use entertainment districts and town centers districts. And then we also have all the civic districts, such as the government use, special public facilities, and then at the end we have the special districts, such as the golf course and waterway districts. Most overlays remained, except for a few that were incorporated into the underlying zoning districts. An example of this is the 40th Street overlay that affected only a few properties in RS2 and RS4, so those were incorporated into RS2 and RS4. And all districts regulations include purpose, uses, development regulations, and additional regulations, if any. That's the structure of each one of the zoning districts. Next slide, please. And so this slide shows the RS district and some of the cleanup that we did, and changes that we are proposing. This shows how we created a consistent maximum heights for all RS districts, so 28 feet for flat roofs and 31 feet for slope roofs. And then on the upper, the example on the upper right-hand corner, so it shows that if a single-family home has an understory, then the height may be increased by 3 feet. This allows the first and the second stories to be to have a little bit more space for them to be, more comfortable. And understories now may be built as of right under the proposed code and no longer require DRB or HPB approval. Next slide. This is an example of how we converted paragraphs of text into tables that are cleaner and easier to find and interpret. All main permitted, conditional, accessory, and prohibited uses were translated into tables. But supplemental regulations such as geographic exceptions remain. These are clearly marked in asterisks on the tables and are found just after the tables. And Gridix is applying interactive maps so that the user can easily visualize geographic exceptions. And you will see that at the end of the presentation. Next slide. Development regulations have been converted into tables with a clear and consistent structure. Each table is also supported by a plan and a section exhibit that clearly show where height and setbacks are measured from. All tables include FAR, density, reference to minimum unit size, lot area, lot coverage, lot width, setbacks, front side facing a street, interior side, and rear setbacks. Certain districts have more specific regulations regarding setbacks and include subterranean, pedestal, and tower setbacks. And of course, building heights too. And this code structure is set up in a way that future amendments can be easily incorporated. In the next couple of slides. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Maria. And as Jose, Maria, and others have mentioned, we're looking to develop or share with you a code that works today, but is also resilient for the future and whatever that may hold. And so what we've identified are a handful of potential future amendments. These are changes that would require a little bit more study for implementation, or maybe require their own independent amendments, and in some cases, referendums or others, tools to seek approval before they can be integrated. And so to maybe start on the next slide, what we've included is a potential future amendment for something called the transfer of development rights. And these would be tied to public benefits. And it's really an approach that allows property owners to transfer development rights from one property to another, but organized and controlled in a way that supports and incentivizes policy objectives like heritage preservation, resiliency, transit-oriented development for full housing, or others. And so that is something that will require a little bit more study and will be put forward as a possible potential future amendment. Next. Another group of potential amendments surround the requirement for green infrastructure, and specifically in the landscape requirement chapter. What we've looked to identify are incentives for expanded rights-of-way, so wider sidewalks, boulevards that can support the vibrant street life of Miami Beach, but also requirements that would promote green roofs or natural-based infrastructure, whether it's cisterns or infiltration permeable pavers or other techniques that can help control and manage stormwater, or planting and landscape strategies that can again augment those sort of vibrant streets. And then lastly, looking at incentives for living shorelines. We know that there are some in the code already and existing programs, but could those be expanded and tied to redevelopment? Next. we are also looking at the requirements for off-street parking and looking at reduced parking rates that would align with the ongoing transportation master plan. And it's really something that would look to support sort of the increased mobility options and multimodal transportation as transit comes online throughout the city. And it's something that would be supported again with some additional research. And the map here just identifies the range of cities across North America that have started to identify updates to their parking minimums in support of resilience as well as livability and quality of life. And so that's something that could be brought forward again as a future amendment. And then lastly, looking at a series of amendments around resilience. So as Anna described, there is a program that would be tied to the base flood elevation and the design flood elevation that ties back to street and road heights. And so what we're looking to do is a group of potential amendments that could help streamline and support that work. And so looking to establish a regulating plan that clarifies the future crown of road for every street in the city. That just helps bring clarity and consistency to development activity throughout the city. Establishing a resilient design flood elevation, DFE, of 5 feet. And then looking potentially at FAR exemptions for some of the transitions. So if we're going to be establishing higher ground floor heights in the short term before road raisings, how do we mitigate that transition with ramps and stairs that ensure accessibility, ensure the kind of quality of street life that makes for vibrant streets in the city, and doing so maybe through a FAR exemption for the ramps and stairs in the short term. So these are things that would obviously require a referendum. And so we've started to quantify and identify what those could be, and those could be brought forward as part of future amendments. And so with now, we're going to switch over to a demonstration that Mac's going to do. And really, this is about ensuring the sort of ease and the simplicity and ultimately the accessibility of the code, making sure that we have a live online system that makes the code accessible to anybody, whether they're in the development community, residents, or potential landowners, and something that the public could use. And so with that, I think I'm going to hand it over to Max now, who's going to do a quick demonstration. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. And good morning, everyone. And so definitely this demonstration is continued with the concept that you've been seeing thus far, clarifying the code, creating easy access to information and transparency information. As Paul mentioned, my name is Max. I'm an architect urban planner, and I founded a technology company based on South Florida that's called Critics. And we offer products and tools, online tools, for easy access to information such as zoning and regulations. This is a preliminary test example. So this is not the complete proposed regulations at this moment. We really just want to demonstrate the functionality. So this system will have the text component so that it will be fully navigatable. And again, this is an online tool and it will be fully accessible, where all of these tables that you've been seeing, all of these clarified text will be available. This system also provides the capacity to share links, especially as different conversations are happening. You can print it, you can download it, or you can even create a free account and have bookmarks created. So bookmarks will allow you to mark certain areas and even add notes to them in terms of responses. There's, of course, a direct correlation, as you've been seeing before, with some of these regulations actually have a direct correlation to a physical location in the city. So part of the clarification that we're trying to achieve, as you can see here, we have a map component that comes with the text element, that once it's selected, it will actually direct you to a full interactive map where all of these exhibits or maps will be displayed. This system, for example, in here you're seeing all of these exhibit 2 in terms of some specific regulations. In this system, we will also load anything that is relevant. So for example, zoning and any other component will be available. This map also has the capacity for search of certain properties. So actually all of the properties will be available from the city. And it will allow you to also do the reverse of type searches. So for example, here, as you can see, is a full interactive system. When a parcel is selected, our system has the capacity to translate all of those regulations into specifically that parcel. So you will have information of the zoning, and in this particular example of this exhibit, with links that will take you back to the tax regulations. So again, the intention of this application is to create this full interactive and transparent access to all the information. We will take it one step further as well and translate in some of those specific setbacks and components, again, every single parcel in the city. In a similar fashion, all of these parcels can be searched by address or folio, and you will also be able to share those parcels throughout. So I think with that, I can pass on to the next stage.
Paul, did you want to go through the next steps for the project?
Yes, I would. Just needed to get my camera figured out. Thank you, Max and Anna. If we could just get the next slide. So it'll give you an overview of where we are and stages we have completed. So we've completed our task 1 and 2. We have the draft code in front of you. The pink identifies where we are today at the planning board. We were hoping to actually talk to the land use committee on Wednesday. That got deferred till next week, so that's just going to get bumped a little bit forward. And then we're going to repeat that later in July, and then the planning board transmittal at that point. After that, we'll start what we're calling task 5. So it's the adjustments and completion, something we're going to work through August, September, and October, but with a series of meetings, both at the first reading and then in September, and then ultimately adoption in October. And so really looking to complete things by the end of October, and then the potential future amendments that I identified earlier in the presentation would be developed some point after that. And that really would depend on direction from the city as to which ones would be brought forward, what sequence, and which priorities. And so with that, I think we can sort of wrap up this portion of our presentation, and I'll hand things back over to the panel. Thank you.
So, questions for the live members or the remote members?
It's a lot to digest. Apologies when I walked in earlier. Also, I didn't recognize many of you in masks, but nice to see you. Maria is my classmate from undergrad 20 years ago. Yeah. And anyway,
where at?
At Tulane University.
Yeah.
But nice to see many of you. I mean, I think it looks very promising, and there's like so much we could talk about. You know, each chapter individually, but I mean, just generally, I mean, what should the discussion be? Like, we haven't received the draft of this, right?
So they're still working out a few things in the draft, so I suspect it will be available within the next 2 weeks, a working draft, so not the final document.
Yeah.
We're going to be continuously making edits until this
So
comes.
maybe before the next one, we could see the draft and really dig into the details. But I mean, just generally, I think the interactive tool seems like a really great idea. In addition, all the form-based initiatives, the diagrams, I think all of those things would really benefit the legibility for the citizen. And if I understand the goal, it seems primarily is to simplify for the public, for sort of non-specialists. I think there's a few things that I would just add. Some of the challenges, have we considered at all, I guess it's outside of this, but have we considered any clarifications to like 50% rule while we're at this? I find that that is often a kind of nebulous metric that people have to contend with, finding high appraisal values. Would it be possible to just like standardize replacement values or some cost that the city would accept so that you could just know if what you're proposing shakes out instead of having to, find an appraisal that suits your project? It would just be a suggestion maybe to staff if no one else. And another thing that I have found that maybe there could be a layer in the interactive tool where I have come into direct contact with some difficulty where, if the clarification is for the public and for owners, property owners, oftentimes when it comes to purchasing a parcel of land or a property, people will approach me and I kind of know to reach out to Michael Belush and schedule a kind of pre-app meeting, and we'll discuss. And often there may be restrictions on the land or, board orders that are not that easy to search for and track down in advance. I wonder if we could get a kind of property history for each individual property. It may be, too much to ask for every property in the city. But if there's a way to sort of, make that publicly accessible without having to go through a planning staff member or something like that, I think that would be helpful. And my head is kind of spinning from all of this, but generally I think this seems great. Maybe for some of the more complex setbacks, like you mentioned, Maria, subterranean and podium and pedestals, maybe 3D diagrams, or we could look more at the graphics of those things.
Yeah.
But generally, I like all the form-based initiatives. I think that's great.
Thank you, Nick.
Yeah.
I'm so glad that we're having this done. The one thing that jumped out to me, I think we tried this like 7 years ago, but it didn't work out. Land use regulations only 4 times a year. That would be really great. Because we have like 10 or 12 every month, and it's really hard to keep up with them. Let's see. You mentioned like consistency, increase 12 foot and change it to 14 feet citywide. That's another thing. We also always make laws for a developer because he wants more height. But sometimes it's a good reason for flood mitigation. But if it's such a great idea, it should be citywide, not just for that project or that street. So I think that's what you're going to do too.
Yes, for non-residential habitable floors.
And you said there's going to be more as of right instead of always going to the DRB and the planning board. But also, I was wondering, can we have more rules that are not allowed to change, like you're not allowed to change a variance or a waiver? Because
So you want kind of like a fixed process, like
Yeah,
you
on
can't
on
exceed
certain
5%
things.
or 10% or whatever?
I'm just thinking like driveways have to be 22 feet wide. People always get a variance for that. Either just reduce the width or not allow the variance, perhaps. I'm really looking forward to getting much deeper into each of these. I have an interest in the zoning laws. It's just, it interests me. Like the transfer development rights, I really want to see what that's about. And I have a lot of suggestions based on what you're saying, consistency, and also there's some conflictions in this code. But I was wondering how I would give you those suggestions.
I think what can come up with a list that you all can share with us, and we'll be happy to take a look at them.
Because I think you come back to us like in a week or two, but are we going to have the draft?
Yeah, that's what we were saying, Gail. It's hard without seeing the draft.
Yeah, we'd like to
Yeah.
see the draft
So
maybe
before
first.
the next one, we could see the draft.
Okay, good.
Yes, in fact, what we have found working with, now we're meeting with city staff every week. And what we have found that is most effective is we give them the draft, then they comment on the draft, and we discuss that. So we hope then that you can have the draft before our next meeting. So we can make, and I appreciate, Nick, what you were saying, it's a lot to digest. That's why I wanted to preface it by saying that we're not putting in here anything controversial that we're trying to slip by, that there's an increase in height that if you had a chance to look at the fine print, you would see that it's there. It's not. But I agree completely. So we'll get it to you so you can see it and then comment directly on the sections.
In that draft that you'll receive, it's going to have a strike through and underline, so you'll clearly see what's new, what's been changed, or what has been moved around. So.
Yeah, that would be great. And one more thing I thought of, I like the idea of having a map for what the future crown of the road is citywide. I've had the experience where we're trying to design, the front, and we have to contact Public Works and see if there's any plans to raise the road. I believe in like the next 5 years or something, and if so, then you have to account for that. And that takes time, and there's uncertainty. So I think that would be a great modification.
Yeah.
What we've been trying to do is that the two things, can, because the city's obviously, Public Works is doing this raising of the road, that there's a dialogue, even though it's not in our code, the one we're presenting to you, but that there's a dialogue between the two. Actually, we just discovered there was a dialogue. There's Perkins and Will has a transit company that has a different name and that we wholly own, and those are your parking consultants. Sometimes the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. So we've begun talking to them to see that even the parking recommendations that they're eventually going to give to the city of Miami Beach, we've begun, it's a different name, so there's no reason. It's like a relative that has a different last name. So so now we've begun sharing it with them so that they know what we're trying to achieve with the code, so that when they make recommendations for parking, they know that, one thing can help the other.
Yeah, I think this is a great movement toward a more form-based code. I would just, I had the same thought about the CIP relative to the schedule of how this starts to roll out. So Nick already addressed it. I think just make sure you build in some kind of waivers, variance kind of process for the director to be able to administer some flexibility, have certain tolerances built in. I like the transfer of development rights, especially as it may be applicable to projects that have inclusionary zoning or affordability built into them. Especially when you have sections of blocks that may not have a newly developed neighborhood, so a lot of older development that has plenty of pedestrian view corridors and all of that. That transfer, across the roadway or something like that to build something a little bit bigger makes a ton of sense, because you're not building a wall of building, you're just giving maybe a little bit more height, a little bit more density or something like that, but getting a public benefit in exchange for it. May even create a little bit of a market for those folks to help improve buildings who can maybe sell some of those rights in order to make renovations or improvements to their structures that they're transferring from. Other than that, there was one question on the parking. I think it was something that said, let me see if I wrote it down. But anyway, it said something about reducing rates for multimodal. I didn't understand that. What does that mean, reduce rates?
Sorry, that should be reduced requirements. So that's a long-term change that we're looking at to reduce parking requirements in order to support multimodal transportation. So areas that have better access to transit and active modes of transportation, in the long term, there may be opportunity to reduce parking requirements there. And that would be one of those potential future amendments that would be looked into later. Right now, what we're looking to is just sort of clarify and streamline the parking districts that you have. We're not really looking at changing requirements at this time.
Understood. Okay.
We have Tanya online, if Tanya Abad, if we could let her speak.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, give me just one quick second if you don't mind, and I'll be right with you. Okay, sorry about that. Multitasking in my office and in my planning board capacity, so I apologize and I appreciate your forbearance. I'm really excited to learn about what's going on. I share and echo the sentiments about we really need to see a copy of this to really understand, because it is a ton of interesting information, some really exciting, some concerning. And so I look forward to getting a copy of what you've presented and anything else that you're going to share. And to that end, my understanding is that the next meeting is going to be sort of the final presentation of this, where we sign off and then recommend it to the commission meeting. It seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like it would behoove all of us to have one more meeting where we have been able to review things more carefully, make some very specific comments based on that review, and then you guys come back with a, what would hopefully be a final draft that we then review together and then goes to the commission. So that would be my fondest wish to see that happen. In terms of the content of what you've presented so far, Miami Beach, I love the idea of synthesizing best practices, both from what we know already and what we're projecting, and from learning from cities around the country and around the world. I think that's a drum that I've been beating on for a long time, and I'm thrilled to see it come to fruition here. There's a little bit of a weirdness, though, which is that as much as we want to make it as systematic and uniform as possible, part of the charm of Miami Beach is that it is neither systematic nor uniform. And we want to make life easier for people who are trying to live, work, and play here, but we don't want to sand off all of the charm when we try to sand down the rough edges. So when we say things that there are things that should always happen across the city or should never happen anywhere in the city, I think that becomes really concerning. And I think we need to look at that, in terms of communication, always and never very often get us all into trouble. And so to say everywhere in the city, this height increase should be X, or there should never be anything less than Y anywhere in the city. I think we really need to make sure that we put forward the best practices and also allow for the idiosyncrasies of the neighborhoods, both in what's already built and what their topographical resilience needs are. I mean, to raise the roads 5 feet in a part of the city that has never once flooded seems to be a bad use of public funds and a bad use of resources in general, when what that part of the city might need actually is better thought out seawalls and living barriers to protect from storm surge. So that's just an example I'm pulling out of the air, so that may not be a great example, but that's a kind of nuance that I think we really need to make sure we're looking at as we put this together. So that's sort of a general overall comment. There are a couple of specifics in addition to what's already been mentioned. I don't know if this is the place to do it, but I think if we're talking about how to do things better, this would be a good place to try to do it. We have been seeing a lot of last minute additions coming to the planning board, and I'm sure the other land use boards, and I know the commission has been seeing it as well. In addition to, seeing land use regulations being amended at every possible opportunity, going to 4 times a year would be phenomenal for everybody. And I think even for those who are looking for the amendments, because it gives us all a better sense cohesively and holistically about what the impact would be for the city, for the neighborhood, for the community, and come up with a better end result for everybody. Similarly, whether it's a commissioner or city staff or people serving on the boards are handed very significant amendments or projects or applications that have been added the night before or a couple of days before, but the details have not been added until literally the night before, or sometimes even when we're sitting on the dais trying to make informed decisions about things we've never had a chance to read, is a really poor way to govern, regardless of who may be doing the governing. And if there's a way to build in a more uniform, cohesive time frame for when applications can be submitted and when supporting documents must be submitted by, in order to let the people who are trying to make informed decisions have time to process the information. And we also have a very engaged advocacy population among our residents. And not everybody all the time, but when things are happening in their neighborhoods, it's, and we're seeing more of it. And I think it's terrific to have residents saying, hey, I think this is a great project. Let's get more of that, or let's make it even better. Or, hey, I think this is a scary project. How do we change it so it fits better? But we need to keep them in the loop too. I mean, at the end of the day, this is where they've chosen to make their life, where they make their living, or where they're retiring, where they're raising their family, where they're building a business. And to make decisions which don't permit them to have input on those decisions does not seem to be a best way of proceeding. And it would go a long way to helping people get engaged, whether they're elected or volunteer or just residents. And I just in quotes, because residents at the end of the day are what we're all about. I think that it's really important that we make sure that all the applications for whatever, whether it's an amendment or a new project, are submitted with all of their relevant backup documentation in time for it to be published online and made available to anybody who needs to know about it before trying to make a decision about it. I mean, to me, that is just beyond fundamental. And I know we have some of that language written in on some of our procedures, on some of our boards, on some kinds of amendments, but can we not make that uniform for the greater good? That's one big thing. You had talked about some resiliency things about shade trees and things like that. Another thing, if you could think about any new projects using best technology on things like porous cement or indigenous plants and that kind of stuff that might not be the first line of thinking about those elements because they're new to a lot of us, or newer to a lot of us. And so and it's not that it must be that way, but I would encourage us to put in language to say the preferred thing would be to have a new driveway that is, resiliency oriented, whether it's porous cement or native grasses with pebbles. I don't know what it would be, but to address that in what you do. Is there anything that's in the code or could be added to the code which addresses existing zones that may have outlived their purpose, for instance, or that the zones have changed from what they were designed to be? For instance, we currently have 2 MXE zones in the city, and most people don't remember that. There's the famous one on Ocean Drive, which has been wildly successful in rehabilitating those historic buildings. But the usage of that MXC now is that there are, in addition to lots of fun places to hang out, there are also a lot of residents, and maybe that needs to be reimagined. You know, not a sunset necessarily, but maybe every 10 years, a zone should be evaluated to see if it's still doing what it needs to do, if the needs are different from what they were, you know, and not just sort of take it for granted that it will be there in perpetuity forevermore with no changes. And, you know, in North Beach, there's an NXC zone on Ocean Terrace, and I would argue that it doesn't need to be there at all because it's, you know, what it was put there to do is already in process with the Terra Holdings project, the Ocean Terrace project, which is a pretty inclusive project, and I would say mission accomplished on that for the goals as stated in the NXC description when they were drafted. And is there a way to, and this is probably a bigger conversation, but to codify some way to balance the very legitimate and competing interests of the different factors that go in to a new project. You know, the development rights, the economics for the developers, the economics for the impacted community, the residents, any historic implications, if that's applicable to that particular project. It just seems like the way it goes now is the people who make the loudest case win. And I'm not sure, I don't know if there's a way to help sort of put everybody on a more even playing field so that it becomes a less emotional discussion and people can really air out the concerns and issues to get to the best project possible without it becoming full of vitriol, which we have seen far too often. And, you know, some folks have a lot of time and money to organize to make their case, and other people who may be equally affected may not have the experience to do that. Regardless of which side people are on, it's irrelevant. It's just sort of the process. I don't know if there's any solution for that, but I did want to pop it into the conversation because as you're thinking about things, maybe there's a way to have that thought inform what you're doing as well. So I'm very interested also in some of the things you're talking about down the road. I'm eager to see what thinking comes of that. I know I've gone on for quite some time now, so I'll turn it over, but I would really like to see an intermediary step between this conversation that we're all having and whatever gets presented as the final, because it seems like there's just too much in between to go from here to this is what we're doing and we're done. And thank you for indulging me. I appreciate it.
Just like one quick clarification, there's going to be one more workshop on June 17th. The transmittal hearing is not going to take place until July 26th. So we do have time, and we do expect more opportunities for public input. And I think there's going to be an additional land use committee meeting before that as well. 2 more land use committee meetings before that as well. So this is not by any means a done deal. This is a working draft, and so we will have opportunities to make tweaks.
One thing that
fantastic, and I really the work that you guys have done so far, it's tremendous and long overdue, and I'm really excited to see what comes of this. So thank you all.
Thanks, Tanya. One of the things that Tanya, when she was speaking, it reminded me just to, obviously you'll have like a version history or amendment so folks can go back and see what has changed over time. Just wanted to make sure we have that.
Mm-hmm. May I add something? Because Tanya sparked a thought in my head too. Something, agenda items. Of course, there's legal requirements, how they have to be noticed and posted. But the titles of agenda items, I think, besides all the gobbledygook that's actually seems like useless information to the average person, should have like a project name or a boundary or an address. I always think the titles are there to trick us so we don't see really, you know, it goes over my head a lot of times. It usually just says, there will be an ordinance change to section 142, blah, blah, blah. And nobody knows really what that means. Why can't there be like something for the layman so they can understand really what that is. Another thing, because last commission meeting, we had an applicant come before us for an ordinance change, and I was very surprised that we had to vote on something, but we didn't have any renderings that should be required, I think. We were not told the exact height increase of the project for this ordinance change. We were not told the density change from what's required to what was wanted. We were not even told what the total square footage of the project would be. This should be, required.
Gail, if I can add to that.
Yes,
The
please.
idea of a zoning diagram would be very helpful. That way, when we're considering modification, we can see an increase to the diagram, which would help us understand that, whether it's like, the particular design or just a generic one at least.
Yeah, what is currently
Yeah.
allowed as opposed to what is being proposed.
Yeah.
I mean, so we voted, in my opinion, on, something mysterious, and that shouldn't be. And that was for an ordinance change that is now going to go to the commission. And thank you very much.
Yeah, our lone member in the chamber.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Daniel Serraldo with Miami Design Preservation League, and we're very happy for this discussion. This was the first time, though, I had seen some of those kind of macro level details. So I just want to go through like a list of thoughts and then maybe even some questions. I guess my first question, though, before I kick it off is, in the calendar it says like adoption by the commission in like September, but that's not each of these individual ordinances, right? Is it just sort of a policy idea that these would be good ideas? Because I believe every height increase or anything needs to go through a procedure. Is that correct, Rogelio?
So this would be basically replacing the current code with this code. Most of the heights are generally going to be the exact same. There's no real height increases proposed, except in a few cases, very limited situations, maybe you'll see a 2-3 foot difference. And those are situations where we see a lot of variances and things that every variance is approved. So we're trying to streamline some of those. But if you see a height increase, it's going to be no more than 2 or 3 feet for specific reasons, just to make certain things easier. It's not intended to change the character of any neighborhood whatsoever.
Okay, well, thank you, but I do have to say on that note with the height increase, my eyes went big when I saw the single family RS3 and RS4 4-foot height increase to 28 feet across the board. That was something about 10 years ago with the McMansion's effort. There was a downzoning in height for these smaller lots. And I mean, I will tell you that like we would be very against a 4-foot height increase for RS3 and 4. Already, it also sounds like, and another question is like, are you now also forcing 5 feet freeboard? Or does the owner still have the ability 1 to 5? Okay, so that's important. But if you're on top adding 4 to an RS3 or 4, you're talking about 28 feet house starting at base flood of 9 plus 5. I mean, it's going to be resilient till 2400, but I do think planning is about maintaining neighborhood character, and I hope you will consider that. And by the way, there's not a change, I hope, to the unit size max of 50 for that.
No, we're not touching that.
Yeah.
So that would be one very strong suggestion before we round up the troops from the single-family neighborhoods, because there's still so many oversized homes, and if you're going to add another 4 feet, which is really more for like Star Island waterfront, etc., that's going to be a non-starter, in my opinion. Another important thing that would be good for this study is, can we model sea level rise in relation to these new requirements? Because as an example, the Al Capone house, it's at like 6 something NGVD, and the city is saying, oh, it's below the flood, but when we modeled it, it's actually dry until 2100. So, and we're talking about 6 feet NGVD, but the new requirements are 9 feet plus 5 feet, which is 14 feet. So, I mean, I don't think anyone in this room knows when we think the sea level rise is going to increase by 14 feet. And so I just think, we got to think of our grandmas and grandpas that actually have to enter these houses that are up on stilts and, 2 to 3 stories to the entry. You could say that's resilient, but what is the cost? What is the socioeconomic impact of these new homes? My guess, these new homes are probably a little more expensive than the existing homes. And so I think when we look at resiliency, we have to think socioeconomically, also environmentally. What are the impacts of sending homes to landfills to make brand new homes that are double the size, triple the height, and all the electrical and other things that come with that. So that's a particular area that I would suggest focusing on. And then let me just wrap up. Another thought is, are there any incentives not to develop your property all the way? I think we do. I know it's scary in the city. I'm sure I'm going to get a call from upstairs. But, I do think that we may want to think about, we're a barrier island. In 1979, the Department of the Interior published their initial report about limiting development on barrier islands. That was the year that the National Register District was made here in Miami Beach. It's been an ongoing struggle over these decades. Luckily, the voters were able in the 90s to put a cap on FAR increases, which has really helped with a lot of the moral hazard that is additional development on barrier islands. But, part of hearing these comments, I'm kind of curious, is this to encourage more development, encourage maximizing? The TDR conversation is interesting. If there's a way maybe we could sell TDRs out of these areas that are on the edge of the ocean to other areas that are higher up, maybe that'd be better. But I think that from an academic perspective, this is interesting, but we need that sort of nuanced approach to the reality that we have here and all of the economic, cultural, social, environmental impacts of this rezoning. So thank you, and I'll look forward to talking with the team too in between now and then.
Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you.
Do we have anybody online?
There's nobody online to speak.
All right, you guys want to close?
I just wanted to say one thing because it was mentioned, even though we're not discussing it now, it's something for the future. The issue of the TDRs is actually an incredible tool. It's frankly a tool that was developed to a great measure for historic districts. And we believe that Miami Beach, would be a great setting for having some of these things, whether it is to preserve history, whether it is, as Mr. Brantley suggested, for creating more affordable communities. And, we really, hopefully, after this stage is over, we will be able to discuss it because, as was mentioned before, there's issues of FAR and all that. But precisely the discussion started with areas around Flamingo Park. How do you allow the people that are there that might just want to insulate their property from seawater rise, but might not want, either do not want to tear it down, cannot afford to raise it, but then still there's things that can be done to make them more resistant. I mean, there is no doubt that there's an environmental issue going on. And I think this is ground zero of it.
Can I ask a question about
Yeah.
TDR? Is it possible that we allow folks to sell their TDR, but we don't allow people in Miami Beach to buy TDR? So you could sell your TDR to somebody in Miami-Dade County, which has a lot more height, a lot more FAR expansion potential.
I don't know. I mean, that's more
Because the
legal.
pushback is going to be, okay, sell TDR to help a historic Art Deco building repair itself. But the argument and the pushback is going to be, well, who's going to receive the TDR now? That people don't want TDR next to their home because it's it's going to be a monster
I
next
mean,
to
the
their home.
two things go hand in hand. First is, for lack of a better word, the donor districts. And then there's the receiving districts. And one of the things, which again, it's beyond the scope of what we're doing now, is to identify areas in Miami Beach
That can be
that
receiving.
can withstand, an increase. For example, 41st Street. 41st Street is an area of Miami Beach, which I think most of us would agree that it's underdeveloped. Frankly, not as well developed as it could be. That could benefit from that, from paying the people that are willing to sell their TDRs, again, the folks in Flamingo Park, that might want to sell the TDRs just to fix their place. So, I mean, I think, again, but that's part of a study, which are the areas of Miami Beach that could stand some of that development, and then which are the areas that are not, and then which are the donor communities, which frankly would be surprised there's not that many. Some of them are maxed out, like Ocean Drive is pretty much maxed out already. So they can't sell credits there. But it's a very interesting thing that I hope that we can continue that study. Right now, again, I want to reassure everybody that the current task is to really make this process more user-friendly. Right now, it's a little bit daunting, as I'm sure Nick has found out whenever you look up a property that and again, but he's an architect, but maybe the homeowner that, like you were saying earlier, okay, you want to look up your property, that you might have enough information there, even what is allowed in my property. I mean, a lot of the people that come to our offices say, I have this property here, and I own this lot, or I own this house. What could I do here? Even to know that. So I think some of these things will make it, and we're working closely with Max to not only make the written part of the code more accessible, but to make the interactive part of the code more accessible, so you could just get on your computer and look up your property and really not have to go to the planning department to get an answer. That's frankly what also excites us. As urban planners, the TDRs excite us more because, right now we're almost acting as editors. It's like, the writer gave you a 300-page manuscript, but the publisher will only go for 200 pages. So now you are in the hard task of editing what is duplicating, what could be done better. But some of the other things are exciting, and again, it is a thriving community. And I would like to also that we did start the process. He's not here now, but one member of our team is probably one of the 2 or 3 best known experts in resiliency in the country. And he analyzed and he did a number of plans of the city and correlated, because you're right, different people have different ideas. To my surprise, it seems the final word now is coming from NASA, of all places. I don't know why NASA is the one involved, but this is the height, this is the height. But what we can't deny is it's going up. How much is it? We don't know, but it's going up. Or we know, but we don't know. We disagree on how much it is.
I have a quick question about TDRs, and I know this is like a much larger discussion, but given that the city charter is written the way it is, if there were a donor district, it would have to be. Are we talking about allowing an increase in FAR if you were to purchase credits? Would we draft it in a way that if you were to purchase a development right from somewhere else, does that allow you to exceed max FAR, or do we write it Like as a kind of overlay, if you were to purchase, you could go up to a certain amount.
Typically, TDR programs have an outside limit, so they'll tell you in a certain district you have, let's say, an FAR of 2 by right, and if you want to go to 3, you need to purchase that extra 1 FAR from a donor district.
And that wouldn't require any voter.
That would require voter approval.
Just for the amendment to the zoning district, but then individually, it wouldn't have to be approved individually.
Correct. We would, the process would be established through a referendum, and then each TDR transaction would be a private transaction, where one property would be restricting themselves to not exceed the existing development footprint, an existing FAR, and transferring that development right to another property that could then utilize those rights.
I see.
I'll just make 2 points. I was going to save it for next meeting, but one is, again, just the community benefits portion of it. If there's a way to incentivize FLR or tie the increase to, hey, you're going to, for every unit of affordability you build by square footage, then there's some benefit in FLR, so that you get the density transfer and you have the benefit of the in the city of Miami Beach, FAR. And then the other thing is that it doesn't necessarily have to be, in my head, at least, just a donor district to a receiving district. It can be within the same district if someone's willing to restrict themselves and they happen to be a neighbor. Especially what I was trying to get to is, because you're talking about graphical representations of blocks and view corridors and pedestrians, things we deal with here on the planning board. So if I got something that's divided by a roadway or something like that, or properties that are adjacent to each other, and one property says, hey, I'm willing to transfer to my neighbor next door because I don't ever want to knock down my building, I think that that's reasonable too, especially in well-established neighborhoods like all of Miami Beach. We don't really have a frontier land in Miami Beach, so this would make sense to me too. So I just don't want to get trapped in the donor recipient where it's looked at as donor way over here, recipient way over there. It can be donor recipient adjacent, and maybe that's the rule, that it has to be adjacent. You get the transfer from an adjacency to your property to prevent walls of building, monuments going down the street. You say, hey, this person adjacent to me is going to limit, that's already existing, it's capped, and it's transferring next door. But this person would normally still have the right to tear down and put up a wall of building across that whole block, but now they're just transferring it to their neighbor, which makes total sense to me.
In that regard, there is a mechanism that allows that to happen. If you have two properties that are adjacent to each other within the same zoning district or zoning districts that have the same FAR, they can create a unified development site where basically they're treated as one property, and then the FAR can be moved from one side to the other, but both owners would have to join in on an application
and
to develop
that may be the nuance of where the limit would exist. Somebody may just not want to be tied
to that. Yeah,
it's like signing on a
co-signing on a car or mortgage.
Yeah,
or something.
You don't want the marriage. You just want the opportunity to date.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
Can I add in a comment?
Sure thing.
And again, I know we're not, thank you, Chairman Brantley, thank you for letting me jump back in. I know we're not talking about the TDR officially now, but as you guys are, I totally understand the notion of you're doing the duty of editing and you're dreaming of crafting something new. I find myself in that dynamic in a marketing role also, so I hear you. But as you think about it, is there a way to incentivize adaptive, in addition to the affordable housing, which I think is brilliant because we've been talking about it for a while now and with not a lot of action. Is there also a way to incentivize adaptive reuse rather than demolishing and building new? So, keeping what's there, upgrading it, keeping as much as possible, upgrading it, and coming up with something really unique to Miami Beach and creative and super special, which when it happens is amazing, as opposed to, okay, now you can do whatever you want on that property I mean, people still obviously have their property rights, but to incentivize adaptive reuse rather than tearing down and building new as part of what you envision for TDRs. And then, you know, I don't remember who said it, but somebody was saying, you know, everybody can agree that 41st Street is underdeveloped. I don't think everybody does agree to that. And I think that as we look at this all holistically, there is a bigger question of how developed do we want Miami Beach to get? You know, we have sewer lines that rupture on a monthly basis. We have parking issues in every single neighborhood. We have resiliency issues, you know, that are completely out of our control. You know, we go from being 90,000 full-time residents on an average Tuesday to, you know, up to 750,000 people on an active weekend. That has to color what we're doing as well. We really need to take a step back. It's not just what could be permitted to happen here, it's what do we want to be permitted to happen here? What makes the future Miami Beach the best possible version of Miami Beach that we could have, right? So clearly cleaning up the code is a part of that for sure, and making things consistent where applicable and with some opportunity for variances where necessary, like all that is 100% necessary and laudable. And I do think there's a lot of interesting discussion to be had about TDRs, but you know, before just talking about what could happen, what mechanisms could be put into place, what do we want it to look like when we're done? And I think that is such an important question. And I don't know that we've ever had that conversation. I mean, I'm sure somebody has, but I don't know that I know about it. And I think that needs to be a big part of the next step of development of the plans that you're working on for TDR and you know, that kind of massive transformational thinking. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
All right. And we
Thanks,
will
everybody.
Thank you, and
See
just
you
note that the next workshop will be on June 17th, so hope to see you there.
Thank you.
Thank you all.